Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 186. So, yeah, we've been really pumping these out of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment of animals. We've got quite a few extinct ones, and we've got a bird species, a few bird species actually. So we're quite excited to get stuck on this one. And this one is basically 6 out of the 7 mods today are going to be done by Great Cakes mods. So you can tell that Great Cakes is just really just knocking it out of the park with a lot of really awesome mods at the moment. So let's get started with one and done by Great Cakes mods. We've got the greatest Sage-Grouse. So I'll have a look at the male here. It's quite a cool mod there. So the greatest sage-grouse, or Centrocerus europhantasis, also known as the stage hen, is the largest grouse species in North America, and it ranges in sagebrush country from the western US to the southern Alberta and Saskatchewan in Canada. It was known simply as the sage-grouse until it was split with the Garrison sage-grouse, which was recognized as a different species, and the mono-basin population may actually be described as different species. So adult greatest sage-grouse, you can see, have long pointed tails and legs with feathers onto the toes. The adult male has a yellow patch over his eye, you can see there, and greyish with a top and a white breast. You can kind of see that there. 2 yellowish sacs on the neck that are inflated during courtship displays, so that's how they display as well. So that's what the male has. The female, you can have a look at her over here. Where she is. A little bit more drab, as most, female birds are in those kind of species. The female is a mottled grey-brown with a light brown throat and dark belly. Adult males can range between 26 to 30 inches and about 4 to 7 pounds, with females being smaller, ranging from 19 to 23 inches and weigh between 2 to 4 pounds. So that's no more than a couple kilos. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, they do have quite a wide range. We'll carry on looking at the male because he's obviously the more impressive one. Really, really awesome mod there. The greatest sage-grouse are obligate residents of the sagebrush ecosystem that usually inhabit sagebrush grassland or juniper sage grassland communities, with these meadows being used as feeding grounds, and use of meadows with a crown cover such as silver sagebrush is actually especially important in Nevada during the summer. So the greatest sage-grouse occurs through the range of the big sagebrush, except for the periphery of its distribution. And they also can be the greater sage-grouse prefer mountains, big sagebrush, Wyoming big sagebrush, and the base of big sagebrush communities. So they are quite in that regard. They kind of a little bit specialist in that regard. So sagebrush covers types other than big sagebrush can fulfill greater sage-grouse habitat requirements. However, they may prefer other sagebrush covers over types of big sage-grouse. Especially in Antelope Valley, there's another place they use black sagebrush to cut more often, and they're different species, things like that. The historic range spans about 16 American states and Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan in Canada. Between 1988 and 2012, their Canadian populations actually declined by 98%. And by 2012, they were actually extirpated from British Columbia and left with only remnant population in Alberta, being 40 to 60 birds. In Saskatchewan, there was only 55 to 80 birds. And by 2013, they were extirpated from 5 US states. And in 2013, the Canada Governor of Council, but on behalf of the Ministry of Environment, after the Species at Risk Act, actually annexed an emergency order to protect the species. So sadly, they are actually they're vulnerable or near threatened, but in some areas they're actually quite endangered. So one of their really interesting claims to fame is their lek mating system. So greater sage-grouse are notable for their elaborate courtship rituals. So each spring, males will congregate in leks, or kind of these big areas, and perform a strutting display. So groups of females observe these displays as the males stand and perform and select the most attractive males of which to mate with. The dominant male is typically located at the center of the lek and typically copulates with about 80% of the females on the lek. The males perform on these leks for several hours in the early morning and evening in the spring. Males will gather in leks to court, usually in late February to April, but only a few dominant males, usually two, breed. And sage grouse mating behavior is complex, and then after mating, the female will leave for the nesting grounds. Open areas such as swales, meadows, burns, roadsides, and areas with low, sparse cover or irrigated fields are used as leks. 45 leks, 11 were windswept ridges or expanded knolls, 10 were in flat sagebrush, 7 were in bare openings, the remaining 17 were all sorts of different sites. Leks are typically surrounded by areas of 20 to 50% sagebrush cover, with sagebrush being no more than a metre tall. And daily morning lek attendance by male sage grouse can vary considerably during the year, with lower attendance when it's raining, pretty much. So let's have a look at the female while we talk about nest selection. So, greater sage grouse dispersed to areas surrounding the leks for nesting, and a study in actually habitat selection in central Montana, they actually prefer sagebrush height and canopy over the 110 daytime feeding and loafing sites of the cocks were recorded. About 80% of locations are occurred in sagebrush, and then other studies, things like that. So, some females probably travel between leks. In Mono County, California, the home range of marked females during 1 month was between 750 to 875 acres, about 304 to 354 hectares, included several active leks. And DNA from feathers dropped at leks show that 1% of grouse may travel long distances to explore breeding areas up to 120 miles away. That actually is a potential strategy to prevent inbreeding because they're moving a large distance. So within a week to 10 days following breeding, the hen will build a nest in the vicinity of the leks. Hens are usually near nests in the lekking grounds, but some hens have been noted to fly as much as 20 miles to 32 kilometers to favorable nest sites. So quality of nesting surrounding the leks is actually the most important factor to the success of the population. Adequate of cover needs to be adequate, so it needs to be quite good. Too little exists, where 13% of the average crown cover in Idaho nests were located, average was 17%. So they don't like arid areas, they like areas with lots of cover. Sagebrush forms in the nesting cover for most sage grouse nests, with concealment being basic requirements. So other things such as rabbit brush, greasewood, and sand shale have often been used, or sand scale. Greater sagebrush typically prefer the relatively tall sagebrush with an open canopy for nesting. In Utah, actually, a study, 33% of the 161 nests were under sagebrush or silver sagebrush that was about 14 to 25 inches or 36 to 64 inches tall as well. So they too prefer that as well. And we'll talk about the breeding of the babies. Let's go to the babies. There we are, little baby. Having a drink. So clutch sizes typically ranges from about 6 to 8 eggs, with incubation time being about 25 to 27 days. Greater sage grouse apparently have high rates of nest desertion and nest predation, and which is interesting as well. Apparently, data from several sage grouse studies indicate a nesting success of about 23 to 60%. So it was quite a bit. But the young are precocial, so they can feed themselves pretty much right off the bat. They can fly by 2 weeks of age, although their movements are limited until about 2 or 3 weeks old. They can stay in flight by 5 or 6 weeks old, and juveniles are relatively independent by the time they've completed the first molt at about 10 to 12 weeks of age, which is quite cool. In terms of diets, adults, the importance of the sagebrush in the diet is actually quite interesting as well. Their diet is sagebrush, so they like living in it and like eating it. Depending on the area they are, depends what they'll eat, type of sagebrush, what species they'll be eating. But of course, they do like it. Among the big sagebrush species, basin big sagebrush is less nutritious and high in temperance than either mountain or Wyoming ones. So depending on that as well. Sage grouse have very muscular. They lack a muscular gizzard and cannot grind or digest seeds, so they eat a lot of soft tissue foods. So they eat a lot of leaves, especially during the late spring and summer, and bush grasses, things like that. And they're quite highly selective grazers too, so they only feed on a few different plant genera. They'll feed on dandelions, legumes, yarrows, and wild lettuce, which most of their forb intake, but they also eat sagebrush, a lot of sagebrush as well. So they are a little bit specialized in their diet. Insects also make a minor part of their diet, with about 2% of their diet being insects, but sagebrush making pretty much like 70-80% of their diet year-round. So they are quite specialized in that regard. Though females before laying, they eat herbaceous dicots because they need that higher nutrition and before they lay, and higher protein and nutrition content. So they'll eat things like dandelion, goat's beard, western yarrow, prickly lettuce, and sago lily. So that's things that are more nutritious, higher in protein before they lay eggs. And juveniles actually, for their first week or so in life, they actually eat primarily insects, so things like ants and beetles, and then their diet switches to forbs, like sagebrushes and things like that, in a more adult diet, and which is interesting as well. And there's actually a study in Wyoming that studied the effects of eliminating insects from the diet of newly hatched sage-grouse. All chicks hatched in captivity and not provided insects died between ages of 4 to 10 days, so that is quite important. So young sage-grouse grouse need insects to help them grow, which is quite interesting. But they do decrease over the next, like, for the first 3 weeks they'll start eating insects, but at about 45 days they tend to kind of goes down. So they don't always eat those. So once they get older. But with plants, they start to eat more plants when they're older. And things like goat's beard and dandelion, high protein things, allow them to, grow up and grow up well. Lots of nutrients and protein, very much the same as a mother, getting ready to lay eggs. So the extra protein and all those extra nutrients helps them to grow bigger and stronger. And sage-grouse actually apparently do not require open water for day-to-day survival if there's succulent vegetation available. If they will use free water if it's available though, and their distribution is actually limited seasonally by water in some areas. And in some migrating sage-grouse in desert regions often occur near streams, springs, and waterholes, which is quite interesting as well. In terms of predators, predators are actually commonly believed to reduce the grades of sage-grouse populations, and most importantly in the timing of death. So nest loss to predators is the most important when potential production of young and recruitment is seriously impacted, so that can have a really bad issue as well. Lack of adequate nesting or brooding cover may account for high juvenile losses in many regions as well. So, though they, as I mentioned, they do prefer that cover. But in terms of predators, they do get eaten by things like coyotes, bobcats, badgers, falcons, hawks, and eagles that prey on both adult and juveniles. Things like crows and ravens and magpies will eat juveniles. Coyotes, ground squirrels, and badgers are their most important mammalian nest predators, so they will eat the eggs. They're also quite a popular game bird, and mortality due to hunting is generally considered to be replacative, so they kind of, until they reach a threshold, so it kind of has to be managed, because as I mentioned, there's quite a high issue with them, dying when young, so they've got to make sure, manage population. But the biggest conservation issues has been things like residential development and energy development that has made their habitat decline. It is actually believed that the population of greater sage-grouse declined from 16 million about 100 years ago to about 200,000 to 500,000 today. And this is mainly due to lack of habitat and loss of habitat, where their birds ranging has actually shrunk quite a bit, being extirpated from places such as Kansas, British Columbia, and Nebraska. And though the greater sage-grouse is not actually considered endangered across the board, since they have quite a wide range, and there's still 500,000 of them, potentially, so they're not, oh my god, they're so close to extinction, but a lot of local populations are considered, or potentially subspecies are considered at risk for extinction because of local populations. As I mentioned, they've been extirpated from places like British Columbia and Kansas and things like that. And there's actually subfossil bones found in southern New Mexico, which suggests that they were present that south in the last ice age, leading to some experts to project they could be highly vulnerable to global climate change. So that could be a big issue as well. So the United States, they are a candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife was actually forced the U.S. Congress not give endangered species status to the species. So that's the big issue as well. The original pension was in 2002. but they were kind of considered still quite common back then. There's a lot of destruction, lack of management of grazing lands, things like that. So there has been a big issue there. And it's been like a little bit of a debacle trying to get that protection for them. But they are, as of 2018, there was the latest, they plan to roll back protections over 9 million acres of land to wind and solar farms and things like that to try and, things like that. But they are trying to get them managed, and they have been decided typically not to list them, but they do need some protections, and they do have some protections at least. And in Canada, there has been they've been designated as threatened, and they've been designated as an endangered species in Canada as in 1998, I mean. So there's been efforts to protect them, and there's even, because they've been mostly extirpated from Canada, most of the population now lives in America. There's only like a couple hundred living in Canada at the moment. And there have been breeding programs actually by the Calgary Zoo to try and help them. It's not really been successful, with only 2 of the 13 hatched birds actually surviving to the age of 7 months. But they are working to try and help reintroduce them into Canada and, get their populations back up, which of course would be bloody awesome. Yeah, really, really cool species. Definitely a big fan of that. So this one was done by Great Cakes Mod. So next up, we're going to have a look at another modern animal. We have got there the stone sheep. So this is a subspecies of an animal already in the game. This is the subspecies of the doll sheep. So there is kind of 2 subspecies of the doll sheep, which is the O'Dali, which is the doll sheep, also known as the thin-horn sheep. And then there's Stony, which is the stone sheep. So originally they were distinguished by the colours of their fur, or the colour of their fur. However, the pelt base designations has been kind of shown to be questionable, with complete colour integration occurring in both subspecies, ranging from white to dark colours in the morphs. And there have been intermediately coloured populations kind of listed as their own subspecies, but then were lumped because it's maybe more like a thermal cline or a longitudinal cline, because as I mentioned, the stone sheeps are more southern while the doll sheep is more northern, so it's kind of like a cline through that. So you can see the more darker morphs at the bottom, and they get lighter as you go up to the top of their range, which is quite interesting. There has been some genetic research to look into them. Mitochondrial DNA suggests there is no evidence between these. There's a subspecies boundary, but nuclear evidence does provide some support. And they actually think that mitochondrial DNA may be not as reliable because there is potentially hybridization between the bighorn sheep and the Dall sheep within recent history. But yeah, they are considered potentially the most northern subspecies, so they're found in the south. So the global population of stone sheep are found primarily in northern British Columbia. You can often be seen licking minerals along the Alaskan Highway, which is quite interesting as well. And the main way you can tell them from a doll sheep, as you can see, doll sheep, you kind of just like got this single color going on here, but these guys have a lot more dark on them sometimes. They've got this female here. So pelt color can actually range quite widely, from like a slate grey-brown to a white rump patch, or dark white tails on the inside of the hind legs, to almost completely white to grey-white with a dark dorsal stripe. And horns you see curved and also varying in colour with the dark brown horns. So then, as I mentioned, they are a different subspecies, so they're not too different from the doll sheep. And yeah, they're not very much different at all. But yeah, it's still quite cool to see this guy and, have a bit of variety. One of those little ones that just pad out the roster a bit. See, quite cute. So this mod was done by Lorby, another great Lorby mod, and now all the rest of these mods, all of them have been done by Great Cakes Mod. So really knocking it out of the park with all of these things. So we're going to South America now. We're going back into prehistory. We have got Miocochus, or you say that, I believe. This is a really cool one, actually. Miocochus, or something. Miocochus. I'll say Mio at the moment. So these guys are actually a genus of small notoungulate, which is a really interesting group of animals I'll get into. Native to South America. They lived during the Middle Miocene, so about 13 to 11 million years ago. And the genus has 2 described species called Eremotherium and Ferricone. The first one was described in 1953. And fossils of this species, or this genera, has been found in Lagerstadt of Laventa in the Honda group in Colombia, which is the most abundant mammal in the Honda group, and actually lives in quite a rich faunal assemblage, which I will get into. That's one of the very interesting things about it. So the genus itself was first described by Reuben Arthur Stilton in 1953, based on a nearly complete and numerous incomplete skeletons found in the Honda group Colombia. The type species was named Enopodus, with more fossils of the species being found in La Venta and also in Peru. So the holotype specimen is a small typothere, which is a group of notoungulates, which was a group of ungulates that was actually only found in South America. So that makes them quite interesting. And they were thought to be cursorial insectivore, which is quite interesting. So they almost like a little mouse deer that eats insects, which is quite interesting. And then a cerebral hemisphere of about 38 millimeters, canines by 5 by 5 by 3 millimeters, and cheekbones. Yeah, they're quite small, nothing quite big. The second species itself was described in 2007 by Darren H. Croft, and this species' epithet remains to Federico Anaya, who's actually collected the fossil and did a lot for that paleontology at the time. But yeah, there's not too much on this guy. It's a very interesting animal. Very, very interesting. But what's kind of like really sets it apart are some of the animals that it lived with. So it shared its habitat with like the Colombian species, as I mentioned. It was found in the monkey unit, in the La Habana Formation. Lived with animals like Podomosiren, other notoungulates, giant ground sloths, Crocodilian and Prusosaurus is another one it lived with. So yeah, some very interesting animals it did live with. And yeah, notoungulates are so interesting. So notoungulates itself as a group, I've covered them before, things like Toxodon, and Strapatheres is another one that's a thing. So they're an extinct group of ungulates that lived in South America. They lived from the Paleogene right into the end of the Pleistocene, so between 61 and 11 million years ago. So we just missed out on, having them today. They were quite diverse. There was a lot of different types of them. And they're the largest group of South American native ungulates, with over 150 genera and 14 families being described, with them being split into typotheres, which include this guy, and toxodonts, which include things like Toxodon. So they were quite diverse. There was all sorts of groups. They kind of convergently evolved with a lot of Eurasian and African species of ungulates. So a lot of them looked like rhinos and horses and tapirs and camelids. Some look like camelids. So it's a great example of convergent evolution. So notoungulates kind of took all these niches, very similar to rhinos, tapirs, antelope, deer. So they took all those niches because South America, throughout most of the Cenozoic, was actually isolated from North America and other places, and really only joined up in the past 5 million years. So all these notoungulates took those herbivore and those ungulate niches, as I mentioned, becoming rhinos, becoming tapirs or equines, or taking their ecology, things like that. So they're quite a wide, diverse group. So they kind of took all those different niches and widely ranged from body size. So some of them were like just about 1 to 2 kilograms, some of the smaller ones, or some got up to a ton. So kind of took that rhino niche. So ranging from mouse deers to rhinos, they took all those kind of herbivore niches. Well, I can't even speak today, but yeah, that's pretty awesome. Do love these guys. Another really cool little mod. Great example to talk about some notoungulates. And then we get to talk about the cute little baby. Look at that cute little baby. I think it's very, very cute. Anyway, that was done by Great Cakes Mod. The next one is also done by Great Cakes Mods. We're going all the way to the Mediterranean. So this is Nuralagus, or Nuralagus rex. I believe how they're also described is the Mycoran giant rabbit. So that's another really cool species here. So these guys are an extinct genus of lepirid, or kind of rabbit, the group that includes rabbits and hares, with a single species, which is Nuralagus rex, which was described in 2011. It lived on Maricona, one of the Balearic Islands in the western Mediterranean during the Pliocene, and is the largest known lagomorph, or the largest known rabbit species or pika species to ever exist. with an estimated weight of about 8 to 12 kilograms, or 18 to 26 pounds, which is about double the size of the average Flemish giant rabbit. And he will talk about different things as well. So far, all the fossils that have been found in the fissure-filled deposits in northwest of Megadona, dating to sometime in the Pliocene. The material was originally and primarily described by Posmona in 1981, and in the genus and species Nuralagus rex was described in 2011 by a full description of the material that include the front half of a skull, as well as numerous postcranial bones that actually showed a lot of the skeleton, so that's quite cool. So in terms of its description, it had a height of about half a meter, and it would have weighed about 12 kilograms, or 8 kilograms. As I mentioned, it's the largest known species of lagomorph, being 10 times larger than the average European rabbit, and about double the weight of the Flemish giant. And this is believed to be due to island gigantism, since they're living on an island that kind of took that niche of the big herbivore on the island, so they were able to, get bigger and take advantage of being that big predator, a big herbivore, and, take advantage of a lot of those food sources. And a comparably small skull relative to its body size and small sensory receptors that include the orbic and tropatic bulbs that actually suggest it had a reduced hearing and eyesight. It also had a short and stiff spine, which resulted in low mobility and inability to jump like other rabbits. And bone histology actually looked at it and actually suggested it was sexually dimorphic, with females being larger than males. And the growth lines within the bone suggest that the large body size was actually a result of growing over a longer period of time, rather than just growing more. The age of sexual maturity was about 3.6 years for females and 6.2 years for males, considerably higher than those expected solely based on body mass. So this also makes sense being an island species. Typically, when animals are on islands, because there's not as many predators, they tend to live longer and reproduce slower. So they don't need to breed like rabbits, of course. They don't need to make lots and lots of babies. They can just chill a bit and, focus on getting bigger and things like that. So that's quite cool. In terms of evolution, they are believed to have entered what is now Menorca through to the Messalin salinity crisis that happened between 5.96 and 5.3 million years ago. So during this event, the Strait of Gibraltar, leading into the Mediterranean, actually closed, which led to the Mediterranean kind of draining and becoming, more salty. And this resulted in the connection of the islands from the Iberian Peninsula that led the ancestors of this genus to colonize the area. And then when the subsequent flood, or the Zanchilan flood that flooded them about 5.3 million years ago, returned the Mediterranean to its original sea levels, which isolated their ancestors on the island. And there is a dearth of knowledge on about this evolutionary history in these guys relative to other rabbits. However, similarities in dental morphology between Nuralagus and Eurasian members of the extinct genus Altipus has led to speculation that the Altipus actually closely related and potentially the ancestor of the species, or the genus. They are the only other native mammal known from Menorca during the Pliocene was an extinct giant species of dormouse, Muscardinus cyclopsis, and which belong to the same genus as the living hazel dormouse. And there's also herpetofauna that includes a giant tortoise, Solotota gymnosa, snakes, Sabinians, lizard and gecko lizards, and frogs. So a lot of these guys would have come when the Mediterranean was, drained out and they could walk across to the island, and then once it reflooded again, they would have become isolated and then evolved on there and become island species. Nuralagus is actually believed to have become extinct around the end of the Pliocene and the beginning of the Pleistocene, which has actually corresponded with the colonization of Mekona by mammals that lived on Mallorca, which is a very island that's quite close away. And as the Ice Age, drained out and reduced sea levels, the islands would have connected. And it's believed these guys would have been outcompeted by the goat antelope Miocochus and other species such as Hippodus, which is a dormouse, and the shrew Nesatites. And they would have been connected. So the islands would have been connected due to the low sea level, and then they would have been outcompeted by the animals of Mallorca. So the unique traits of this species are most likely a product of the insular environment, which has no natural predators. Physical similarities between Nuralagus and Pedalaris fossili, which is another extinct insular lagomorph that until recently didn't have any predators, shows that there's a lot of similarities between them, even though they're distantly related. The same environment. It's a great example of convergent evolution. And you can see the cute little baby here. So yeah, that's another really cool animal that we get to talk about. Nuralagus rex. A really cool giant species of rabbit. Actually amazing. Quite cool. So yeah, definitely a big fan of that. So next up, we are going to be moving on. We got another cool species here, also done by, you guessed it, Great Cakes Mods. We're moving on to a couple species of terror birds at the moment. So we're going to move on to the first species, a smaller one. So this is a really interesting one. This is called Llallawavis Scagliai, which is the magnificent bird of Scagliai. These guys were large extinct species of predatory bird from Pliocene, Argentina, and it's actually the fossils of the most complete terror bird or forest raccoon yet found. So the fossils were discovered in 2010 in sediments along the cliffs of the La Estepa beach and the lower parts of the Playa Los Lobos Alo formation that lived about the late Pliocene about 3.5 million years ago. The terror bird is known from a nearly intact skeleton that includes complete palate, complete trachea, skull, voice box, and eye bones, or the scleric rings, and was a medium-sized forest raccoon, so it wasn't huge compared to the next animal that we'll be talking about. It was about 1.2 meters tall, or about just under 4 feet tall, and it weighed about 18 kilograms or 40 pounds, and lived in Argentina approximately about 3.5 million years ago during the Pliocene. So in terms of its paleobiology, it likely roamed in grassland environments, much like its relatives, and CT scans of its inner ear showed that they could only hear frequencies between 380 and 4,230 hertz, and it had a quite deep voice. And the same CT scans actually show that the inner ear of the species was finely tuned to sudden changes in movement, which was actually suggesting that they were chasing prey and quickly turning to chase prey. And such adaptations have been seen in other predators that hunt in open areas and need to chase fast and agile prey. And this is corroborated by studies in a close relative of Llallawavis in their larger Mirabolornis, whose limb bones show to have various adaptations for high-speed pursuit, with estimates suggesting a top speed of about 27 meters per second, or about 97 kilometers, or about 60 miles per hour. Though somewhat slower speeds are actually considered to be more plausible. Additionally, the limb bones are able to withstand high stresses, in addition to the presence of laterally compressed claws on the feet of most terror birds, actually suggests that the uses of limbs in prey capture as well, so they would be able to pin down and hold prey too. The joints also separating the skull bones were fused, unlike most birds, so that would have reinforced to help them dispatch prey, and likely would have used the skull to pin them to the. They would use their legs to pin them to the ground, and then would have used their long, strong legs and talons, and then they would have used their beak to deliver the killing blow and kind of process it. And then combine this paints them as a high speed pursuit predator chasing small noto ungulates and through the plains, much similar to those like that of a cheetah. In contrast with their much larger relatives, as we'll get into, that would have maybe lived in more wooded areas and hunted slower prey like larger noto ungulates, ground sloths, and glyptodonts. So that's quite interesting as well. But yeah, really, really cool species. So this gives us a really good idea of, what terror birds actually kind of look like. But they're not the biggest of the bunch. So next up, we've got, also done by Great Cakes Mods, we have got Kelenken Guillermoi. So that's another really cool species. That's the female. Let me look at the male. Put him over here because I like the colours on him. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Of course that happens. There we are. So this is Kelenken. So Kelenken is a genus of forest raccoon, very similar to the other genus. They're extinct group of large predatory birds and lived in what is now Argentina in the middle Miocene about 15 million years ago. So this is older than Llallawavis. So I'll go into the description or the taxonomy. They are a type of terror bird, and they were discovered by Argentine high school student Guillermoi Zambela between two houses at about 100 meters from the railroad in Comalo, which is a small village northwest of the Rio Negro province in Patagonia in Argentina. And the outcrops of the specimen were discovered belonged to the Colon Grower Formation, and they actually the kid preferred its specimen himself, and the discovery led him to shift from studying psychology to study paleontology and earth sciences. So that's cool that it kind of inspired him to do a lot more with paleontology. But yeah, that's a really, really cool model. I really do love this guy. So the specimen became part of the collection in the Museo Asana Paleologica Barcelona in Rio Negro. And prior to the animal actually receiving a scientific name, it was reported and discussed, but in 2007 it was given the name given to the holotype Kelenken Guillermoi, which is the genus name actually referring to a spirit in the mythology of the Teluche people of Patagonia that resembled a giant bird of prey, and the specific name honors the kid that discovered it. So the holotype is an only known specimen is actually a nearly complete skull, which is somewhat crushed from top to the bottom, with most of the eye socket, brain case, skull roof, and left quadrate preserved, though some eye spots are missing. The specimen also include a tarsometatarsus, or lower leg bone, a small upper portion of a toe bone, and some other small fragments, but it is mostly the skull that's kind of what is known. The scriber concluded these bones belonged to a single specimen, and they were morphologically consistent with being those of a large forest raccoon, and the specimen possesses the most complete skull of a large forest raccoon known at the time. Previously, only such skulls were things from fragmentary things like Forest racus and Dipix concernato, so that's quite cool. So looking into its evolution, they looked into the group of Forest raccoondae that had a large, beak size. They were recognized as 5 Forest raccoon subfamilies are recognized, and they actually found that Kelenken was most similar to taxa that had been traditionally been conceived as Forest raccoons. So in terms of its relatives, Llallawavis scagliai is in the group, which is like the smaller ones. These guys would have been a little bit later and closely related to like Titanus walkeri and Forest racus. So the ptera birds themselves, they're a very interesting group. So during the early Cenozoic in South America, as I mentioned, isolated, they would have been in their own group and doing their own thing on an island. After the extinction of non-bird dinosaurs, mammals underwent this big evolutionary diversification. Though some bird groups, things like Gastornis and things like moas and elephant birds, but also forest raccoons, they went through gigantism. And forest raccoons are extinct now, but the only living members of their group are the 2 species of Cereemas, which is quite interesting. And forest raccoons were present in South America from the Paleogene and survived right up until the Pleistocene. And as I mentioned, South America was isolated, so they would have only really become connected to North America during the Pliocene. They did appear in North America at the end of the Pliocene during the Great American Biotic Interchange, though while fossils of Europe have been assigned to this group, they've been quite disputed. Kelenken itself is known from the Middle Miocene, about 15 million years ago, and since forest raccoons survived until the Pleistocene, they actually appear to be more successful than the Metatherian Thylacospilid predators there. And it's possible they can compete with mammals, predatory mammals that enter North America. So, like other forest raccoons, large flightless birds with long hind limbs, narrow pelvises, small wings, and huge skulls with a long, compressed, and hooked beak. Kelenken is the largest known of them all, being 10% larger than the largest forest raccoon previously known, such as Forest racus. The holotype skull is about 2.3 feet long, or about 716 millimeters, from the tip of the beak and the central nucleus at the back, so it's basically like the size of a horse skull, and it makes it the largest skull of any known bird. And the height believed for the Kelenken, based on some other things as well, was about 3 meters, or about 9.8 feet, just under 10 feet tall, while modern Cereemas reach 90 centimeters, or 3 feet tall. And the weight of Kelenken has been estimated to be well above the 100 kilograms. So prior to discovery, as I mentioned, most forest raccoons were not known for a well-preserved skull, but these guys have quite a well-preserved skull. And they've been able to observe differences within the group. So the upper beak is very long, which is actually half the total length, and it's actually longer than things in Forest racus and Patagonis. So these guys would have had some slightly different adaptations. And that leads to us things like feeding and diet. So Velociraptors were thought to have been ground predators or scavengers, and often actually been considered the apex predators of Cenozoic South America in the absence of mammalian placental predators. They did compete with borahyaenid mammals. Early hypotheses suggest they had these large skulls with hooked beaks, and which is interesting as well. And they were flightless, as shown because of having such small wings. And the body mass, and the research pointed out the narrowing of the pelvis as adaptations to ensure that birds to search and take smaller animals in tall plant growth or broken trees. So they would have been actually quite a bit able to, move through woodlands and things like that. The large expansion around the eye, as you can see, the lacrimal bones, which is also seen in modern hawks, actually protects eyes from the sun and enabled keen eyesight that allows them to hunt in open sunlit areas and not shaded forests. So these guys would have been open land predators. In terms of leg function, some research into the tibius or the tibiotarsus or the shin bones of Velociraptors actually determined their speed. So as I mentioned, they could have been quite fast. Though it's very unlikely that due to the large size of these birds, they may have not been quite as high. But they were able to move a lot faster, and they also could have used their legs as kicking weapons, like modern ground birds and seriamers today, I believe, do as well. And they could have been able to use these claws and their beaks to break into the shells of glyptodonts and armadillos. There was something more specific to Kelenken. Actually, the discovery of Kelenken actually shed doubt of the traditional ideas of the size and agility of Velociraptors, with large members of the group being more bulky and less adapted for running. So these guys would have been a lot better, at kicking and not being running, but adapted for getting larger prey, being more robust and more powerful to actually hurt those larger animals. The long and slender tarsi metatarsus showed that the birds may have been much swifter than the smaller, more heavy-set Cerebrontornis, and well, maybe not as swift as an ostrich, and may have actually could clearly run faster than had been previously assumed for large Velociraptors, based on their slender leg bones actually looking like the modern flightless rayo. So that article suggests that Kelenken would have been able to chase down small mammals and reptiles, and they actually suggest would have been quick as a greyhound, and while they were other large predators at the time, they were limited in numbers and not as fast as them, and many grazing animals would have been quite ample prey. And actually, to suggest that they crudely resemble things like Tyrannosaurus, having gigantic heads, very small forelimbs, very long legs, and had the same kind of meat-eating adaptations. So they probably could have been actually a little bit faster than previously thought, but, being big, they probably would have taken some big prey too. They definitely wouldn't have been picky. Beggars can't be choosers. But also, there's been some research into the skull and neck function of this guy. So in 2010, a study looking into a relative of Llallawavis actually just had a bite force of 133 newtons and at the bill tip, and this was also potentially the case in larger Velociraptors. And they interpreted the loss of the adaptation and adaptation for enhanced rigidity of the skull that allowed them to deal with higher stresses, and then the pullback as well, since the skull was actually relatively weak on the sides and midline. So they actually concluded it was actually the beak was actually unsuitable for subduing large, struggling prey, so they would have either fed on smaller prey they could have consumed and killed more safely, or when targeting large prey, they would have been more strategic in using like well-timed strikes to particularly peck at the prey and like attack and retreat rather than holding them down with their beak and struggling, because that could potentially break the beak. And then in 2012, they actually did a follow-up study, then based on the same specimens, and they found the neck to be divided in 3 sections. By manually manipulating the vertebrae, they concluded they were adapted to carrying a large head and helping it rise to a maximum extension on downward stroke. And this was soon to be true for other large Velociraptors. So these guys would have been able to have large, more rigid and stiff skulls, and be able to have larger bite forces and things like that to try and break them. And then they split them, the Velociraptors, into 2 different types of skull types. There was the Pliotarian skull type and the Terrorbird skull type. So the sort of Terrorbird skull type includes things, as I mentioned, like Llallawavis, which is the one that we covered before, and then the Terrorbird skull type, which is the larger members, would have had more specialized or rigid skulls. And even though there would have been these differences, they would have handled prey similarly, with the more rigid skulls and larger bite forces would have been adapted for dealing with larger prey, which is quite interesting as well. So Kelenken itself is actually found in pyroclastic flows from the Kelenken Formation in Patagonia. The age of stratigraphy has only been predominantly studied at the time, but it seems to be about 15 million years old. So at the time, there was a more open woodland habitat that was actually quite semi-arid, with woodlands or brushlands. The open environment would have allowed larger animals and more cursorial, or walking adapted animals to be able to run around and do things, and which actually shows that the early Miocene, which would have been forested, shows a trend of more opening lands and things like climate change and global cooling. And the formation itself is actually quite a rich formation with lots of different mammals, at least 24 taxa, with things like xenotherans such as Eremotherium, Megathalectus, Nodoungulates like Strapotherium, Protypotherium, Pangoda smilus, which is Rhasodont, marsupials, primates and rodents, and a lot of and then a few fossils of birds, fish, and things like that. So it lived in a quite rich environment with potentially quite a large amount of prey. So that's quite cool. So that's Kelenken. Here's Kelenk done. So that was done by Great Case Mod. And last but certainly not least, we've got a very, very cool animal here today. So this is the Pan-American ground sloth, or Eremotherium. Laprodelli, I believe you say that. So there's two different species. Well, actually, there's one that's 100%. I'll see if I can find him. There he is. So we'll have a look at you. So this is a big ground sloth, and potentially one of the biggest. Really, really cool species. So Eremotherium, which is Greek for steppe or desert beast, is its name, is an extinct genus of giant ground sloth from the family Megatheridae, so it is related to Megatherium. It lived in the southern North America, Central America, and northern South America, and it was actually one of the largest ground sloth, being comparable to an elephant in size, weighing about 4.5 tons and measuring about 6 meters long, potentially slightly larger, all within the same range as Megatherium. So in terms of history and naming, it was actually often largely confused with Megatherium, and naming of many additional species are actually synonymous with Llallawavis. So for many years, for the genus have been known, the records actually found as early as 1823, where it was found by fossil collections J.P. Seven and Joseph C. Hasham, where collected several teeth and skull and mandible fragments from Georgia in the United States. And they were not described until 1852, where they were described as a species of Megatherium. And then they kind of, kept on going on and then describing them as Megatherium. And they were all described, and then they were not all referred to Eremotherium until the late 20th century. So there was originally named as Megatherium abali, then there was synonymized as Eremotherium labralodi. So it was all those species that were thought to be Megatherium were then lumped into Eremotherium. And yeah, so it's got a very confusing taxonomic history, which is actually kind of annoying, and it's been like all of that, but now it's kind of lumped down into two species. So the species that we have here is Maramoldi, and then there's Ecomians and Savani, which is the three species at the moment. And it's just a very complicated taxonomic history. But yeah, we'll carry on onto these animals. So Eremotherium was actually believed to be slightly larger than Megatherium, reaching about 6 meters with a height of 2 meters or 6 foot sit on all fours, and it reached about 4 meters on their hind legs. So basically the height of a giraffe. So very, very huge. Weight estimates suggest between 2 to 6.5 tons or kilograms. 2014 to 600-550 kilograms, or between 4,440 to 14,440 pounds. A study in 2023 suggested a body mass of about just under 4 tons, and they potentially would have been 4.4 tons or 4.5 tons would have been most likely. And an even study now considered they would range between 968 to 5,900, so just under 6 tons. And this would make it at the time one of the largest land-dwelling mammals in the Americas, alongside the large, proboscideans like the mammoths and mastodons and gomphotheres it would have lived with. So yeah, it would have been up there with some of the biggest land mammals in the world and in America too. As a ground-dwelling sloth, they had relatively shorter limbs compared to modern arboreal sloths, and also had a longer tail, and due to its large body size, it actually could have been covered in hair, or alternately covered in a dense layer of 1 centimeter hair, or sparsely covered in hair. So its skull was large and massive, but actually lighter in build in compared to Miocochus. A complete skull measured about 65 centimeters in length and about 33 centimeters wide at the zygomatic arches. So they would have a lot more similar skull to Miocochus, but not quite as robust. And the points of things like the cervical spine, which are relatively larger in tree sloths and numerous other ground sloths. So the downward pointing things and the eye sockets would have been small and slightly lower than Miocochus and other sloths. So very similar to the group Miocochus, would have had these kind of a little bit more leaner, meaner skulls. Seems to be adaptation for browsing as well. And they potentially would have also had a longer tongue to be able to grab things almost like a giraffe. But postcrania is known as well. So we do have pretty much all the skeleton is known. It is a very well-known species in terms of how it looks. Had a massive femur, which was actually believed to be about an average length of about 64 centimeters, or about 45 centimeters through trochanter. So a very, very huge animal, and doesn't differ too much from other species of Megatherid, but there are some small differences that actually classify as different species. Very big and short claws that were curved. You can see the curved claws here. They kind of walk on the sides of their feet as well, and you got these large claws that they wouldn't have been walking, on the ground with them. They would have been kind of curved, almost like knuckle walking and walking at the side just to keep those claws, this is actually pretty typical for most species of ground sloth. So there's nothing surprising. Fossils of Eremotherium, though, have been found in very many sites, about 130, with the earliest species being found exclusively in Florida during the late Pliocene, and Svetsvoldi only known from a single femur in Bolivia, so I don't know if you'd even call those different species, I'm not sure how you describe them, but this species here, Eremotherium larodomi, is actually known from many sites from the late Pliocene all the way to the end of the Pliocene. The range of this species is the widest of any known ground sloth, hence the name the Pan-American ground sloth, spanning basically from the most northmost record of the species is New Jersey, which actually likely represents them moving northwards during an interglacial, potentially about 130 to 115,000 years ago. And the southmost record of this genus is in Brazil. And most records of Eremotherium in Brazil are actually found in the east, and are particularly frequent found in tank deposits is interesting as well. Other records of the genus in North America, north of Mexico, are typically confined to Texas, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, and the south coast and the southern Atlantic coast. So they tend to be hanging around those kind of areas. So Florida, Texas, South Carolina, and Georgia. And by the end of the late Pleistocene, they actually would have been probably absent North America, north of Mexico. And though they would have maintained a wide distribution. So they probably would have changed. As the world went through interglacials, they would have moved in and out of America. There may have been some isolated populations in places like Florida, which is a little bit warmer. But yeah, they would have been kind of in and out of America during interglacials, which is quite cool. Though most records of this genus from Mexico are from the southern or mid-latitudes, and they seem to have been live in a wide range of areas, which is quite cool. So in terms of locomotion, as I mentioned, they would have had these inward turned feet and these kind of claws where they would have been walking around. Their hands were turned inwards, similar to things like calicotheres, and also suggests that locomotion would have been rather slow. They would have been unable to perform digging activities, which had been demonstrated in other species of ground sloths that have been known to dig large burrows, which can be seen in the construction of the forearm, just as the manipulation of objects was minimized through the limited ability of fingers to move with each other. However, Eremotherium was able to stand on its hind legs and pull branches and twigs from its hands, and would have been able to pretty much be a giraffe. It took that niche of a giraffe in the American ecosystem. And as well as being able to make defensive strikes with their long claws, they would have been able to defend themselves pretty well. The standing up was also supported with a strong tail that they had, very similar to armadillos and anteaters, with the massive tail vertebrae. And the front area of the tail suggests they would have had strong musculature, which are able to support them. And other adaptations, such as the ischium, how it fixes the tail, suggested the tail would have been able to straighten up and support them as they reared on their back legs. Another really cool thing as well is this evidence of social behavior. Due to some finds, there's several individual sites. There's one site in St. Helena in Ecuador with 22 individuals that actually suggests that Eremotherium may have been a herd animal living in small herd-like groups. And there's other groups with at least 15 individuals and 6 juveniles. They were found in close association on a single horizon and have been interpreted as being, hanging out together. There's potentially could have been in a group would have been gathered around a waterhole or died in a relatively abruptly due to unknown event. But on the other hand, someone's clusters could be from a sinkhole that could have accumulated over a long period of time. In the cases likewise for Lestodon, potentially interpretations, but modern ground sloths, modern tree sloths live solitary lives, but it's still very possible that these guys could have been social and herd species. I think that's quite cool. Very similar to like modern elephants, which has been quite cool. In terms of the diet, they do have extremely high crowned teeth, which however do not reach the dimension of those in Megatherium. As their teeth lacked enamel, their hisphodonty would now have been specialized. They do not have mammals, so they cannot eat grasses like a lot of mammals do, because a lot of the mammals that eat grasses need enamel, because grass is quite tough. And the different expression of this high crownedness in their two large ground sloths actually is potentially rather to be sought adaptation to virgin habitats. So Eremotherium would have been a more tropical sloth, living in much more tropical lowland habitats, and Megatherium would have been living in more temperate habitats. And they couldn't eat grass. From an anatomical point of view, the only moderate wide snout and large total cheek surface suggests these guys were kind of mixed feeders. The average surface area of all teeth at the chewing surface is about 11,340 millimeters squared, which roughly corresponds to the values of Megatherium, but clearly exceeded those of like Lestodon, also giant, but also has a much broader snout. The later genus is believed to be myelodontid, and is thought to be a specialized grazer. These guys would have believed to be browsers. And moreover, the total purchase area within the range of variation of present-day elephants, some of which prefer mixed plant diets. In support of this view actually comes from isotopes. Analysis on the teeth of Eremotherium suggests they would have fed on grass, in rather open landscapes, but on foliage in large close forests. So there was actually individuals suggest microwear analyses on an individual from the late Pliocene that was about 34 to 37 million years old. Would have been a mixed feeder, so eating a lot of shrubs and trees, potentially eating grass as well. So it would have been a mixed feeder. Just being a big herbivore, most big herbivores, they can't be specialized that much. They tend to just eat what they can, or eat what they, So eating grasses and branches and leaves and things like that. And it's really cool. There are paleopathologies of this guy as well. And as been described, they have things osteoarthritis, things like calcium via phosphate depositation disease. So we do have, with a lot of specimens, we do have a lot of paleopathologies or diseases actually preserved in them, which is quite cool. And talking about their classification, they are in the extinct family group Megatheridae, which is a very large group of sloths. They are closely related to the modern-day three-toed sloths, while other species of sloth are actually more closely related to the two-toed sloths. So two and three-toed sloths are not closely related. They're actually quite independent. So things like Mylodonts, things like Lestodon are actually more related to two-toed sloths, while things like Megatherium are more closely related to three-toed sloths. So these guys are related to three-toed sloths. And it's a great example of convergent evolution. Eremotherium's closest relative is in the namesake Megatherium and is endemic to South America, but these guys got into North America. The direct ancestor is likely Pro-Eremotherium, believed to be, which is from the Pliocene. Little is known about the evolution. It is believed to have evolved in the early Pliocene in South America, but then actually kind of went up into the Isthmus of Panama during the Great Biotic Interchange and would have colonized North America. The oldest fossils actually come from the Pliocene in South America, North America, suggest the species may have actually evolved in America, North America, and then went down to the United States. So its ancestors would have gone to North America, became Eremotherium, and then come back into South America, which is a really cool interpretation, actually. And discovery of Pro-Eremotherium actually supports this hypothesis. So it's believed that close ancestors of things like Eremotherium would have actually evolved and first migrated to North America and evolved there. They moved back into South America through the after the Isthmus of Panama was formed, similar to the Glyptodont-Glyptotherium. So it is not unprecedented. So this actually could be a North American genus of ground sloth that kind of came back to South America, which is quite cool. In terms of their relationship with humans, their disappearance of the Eremotherium coincides with the extinction of the megafauna at the end of the Ice Age, which went extinct with all sorts of different species of megafauna, like mammoths, mastodons, all those big saber-toothed cats. So there are hundreds of different species of large animal throughout at the end of the Ice Age. I've kind of like almost beat this point to a pulp, almost, but one of the latest finds is actually believed to be about 11,000 to 13,000 years old, and actually a study in 2025 actually suggests that they could have survived to the early to middle Holocene, with 3 specimens of this species actually dating to about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. So they could have actually survived into the early Holocene, so we only missed out on these guys by a few thousand years, which is a little bit sad. There's no direct evidence of humans hunting Eremotherium, and there's actually a possible indication of interaction with a tooth that some authors suggest that the tooth of the Eremotherium would have been modified by Paleo-Indians, though some reject it and say likely could have just been, because of natural processes, which is interesting as well. And human evidence have also been seen in other species of Pleistocene xenarthrans, such as Glossotherium, which is another species of ground sloth, and Glyptodonts, such as Spectacales. So very possible humans could have been modifying their teeth. But yeah, they would have gone extinct potentially the same reasons why a lot of other megafauna went extinct at that time. Either climate change, human hunting, a combination of those factors, also potentially disease. There's also talk of potentially a comet or an asteroid hitting the Earth at that time that could have caused an extinction event. But yeah, that's very hotly debated, and it is very hotly debated what killed the megafauna. But yeah, it could be a combination of those factors. But I believe the general consensus at the moment was potentially a combination of climate change, with the world getting warmer, and then the movements of humans into these places and hunting these very large slow-breeding animals, even a little bit, could have caused them to decline and go extinct, as in a lot of the hunting would not have been sustainable. So that's kind of the general consensus. But yeah, anyway, we are done. So I got to thank everyone for really, really awesome mods today. So thank you, Great Cakes, for making most of these lovely mods. And thank you, Lorby, for making the stone sheep, another really, really cool one. So yeah, thank everyone for today. And I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.